Hi everyone, we've got a nice frosty winter scene from East Leek. It's one of my friend's photos. It's got a really lovely sky, nice simple sketching. I kept portrait. You've got your horizon line, keep it straight. On the photo it's not quite straight, but keep it as straight as you can. It always looks better that way. A few distant trees. You've got this tree that's the main focal point, and then the paths come out this way and this way. Then I want you to concentrate on getting the bigger puddles in. As you come forward, the puddles get wider and they get bigger, and it's all giving you that sense of perspective. So you want to draw that out first. Colours wise, again I've kept it nice and simple today. We've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, use raw sienna. Permanent rose, you only need tiny amounts of those two. Cobalt blue on its own. Then I've got a mixture of cobalt blue, a touch of permanent rose and a touch of sepia, and that's giving you a purpley stroke aubergine colour. And then I've got sepia on its own. So they're the colours you'll need today. Okay, so we're going to come on and get a first wash on. Now I'm going to do the sky and the puddles at the same time. So take your time getting the water on. You could do this in two sections if you wanted to, but it should be easily achievable in the time anyway, because the sky's quite small. So I'm just taking my time, making sure that I've got plenty of water on. Make sure your brush is clean. So you're about to go into your Naples yellow first. I always do this and double check my brush a few times. Don't want mucky Naples yellow. So I'm just dabbing into the Naples yellow. I've got it neat on the palette, but I've loaded my brush with water so that I can start to get this colour in. So you've got that lovely little bit in the sky, and then into these puddles. Those two definitely in the distance have a little bit. And I'm actually going to bring a little bit in down here. It'll all make sense later. Brush, bit of a rinse, dab into the water again, not too much, and then pick up a little bit of the rose. Now your aim here with the rose is to make sure it's not too strong, but to come round this Naples yellow. This is especially important if you're using raw sienna, because you want to stop that mix of the blue and the yellow to make a green. You don't want that happening in the sky. So just bringing a little bit of that through. And again, it's quite nice. We'll just reflect a little bit here and there on the path. I can't see a huge amount in either of those puddles. And then I've rinsed my brush and I'm coming into the cobalt blue. So this is now where you're going to start with your circular motion and start to get some of these cloud shapes in. So remember, you're going for an impression of, it doesn't need to be exact. If you wanted to, you could lift out some cloud shapes. It's a really lovely sky, so you could get away with that. Lift it out. I quite like leaving it soft. So now if you're mixing and you're mixing in with that rose, you can see it's going purple, which is not a bad thing. That works. If you do touch into the Naples yellow, just try not to mix it too much. It just tends to still sit okay if you don't mix too much. Then I'm going to come down and just get a little bit showing in that puddle, and again some little bits on the pathway. And remember, the same thing applies. How much green? You're not going to want a huge amount of green. There's some green down that side anyway, but you want it to appear quite blue. So it's nice and frosty. Right, and then you're going to come into this puddle, this big one, and start to get those cloud shapes. So as long as it looks like cloud shapes, you'll get away with it. So don't feel that it has to be exact. I'm just going to sweep some of this because it's exploded quite a lot that way. I don't want that to hit the sky. So I've just got a dry brush. I'm just stopping that from going any further. Right, so I'm into this purpley colour now. I want to be quite sparing with it, but it does add an extra dimension. So if you're really worried, drop down to number 6. I'm using around number 10. A number 6 would put you a little bit more in control. If you put very little on the brush, it should still work okay. And you're just adding a little bit more dimension. So I'm popping a little bit in, circular motion, little circular motions. And because we've mixed this colour, it's going to blend out really nicely. So a tiny bit on the brush, I've dabbed it off a little bit. I'm just going to sweep through a little bit at the bottom. We've got a little bit of a sweep in. What you don't want is too visible stripy lines. So I'm just trying to blend it just a little bit. And then I'm going to come into this puddle and just add some dark within there. The trick really is to not go as dark as the puddle. I think the puddle on the photograph is really dark, but I don't think it needs to be that dark, and it would still work quite nicely. So we're just going to take some of the purple in. And just an odd dab in this one. There's still quite a lot of light in that puddle, so we don't want to lose it all. Okay, so that's the first stage. I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so we've got a slight distant hill on the left that I'm going to pop in with a bit of water. So I'm using my round number 6. Just pop in a bit of water, and I'm going to come in with that aubergine colour. It's a good colour in the sky, and it's going to give a really nice sense of distance. And just bring that down. If you want to create that little bit of a slant that's starting to happen there, you can bring that way a little bit there as well. And then with a little bit of sepia, I'm just going to create this tree line this side. So I want this to be quite strong now. So I'm just coming in with it straight on the brush. So I'm thinking dark and strong. I'm not going to make the line too smooth at the bottom. And I'm also not going to pop this higher tree in here. I'm not keen on that. I'm just going to leave that as is. I can come along and do some little bits in the distance along here. I need this bit to dry with the distant hill before I can do the other ones. Try not to make too much of these. You want them to be there, but if you start trying to make it look more than a dab and more into a tree, you'll end up with something a lot bigger. It's that thing where you work into something and it gets bigger and bigger, so you just want a few squiggles really on that line there. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that off. I'm going to carry on over this side now, getting these tree shapes in. I've got my round number 6, and I'm using the sepia pretty neat. So I'm going to come in and just start this side again. Just start to get these shapes in. Remember, nice and loose. You can try a bit of brushing, side brushing, dry brushing. You've just got to be careful you're not going too far really. You don't want them to be too high. I might try a couple here. If you're keeping it, keep it flat, remember. And you've got a very little action this time, because you want that to stay really low. It does give a randomness which you can't get when you're just dabbing, but I don't want them to end up too big. So I've done a few little dabs. That's going to give me something to work with, and then I can come in below. Just to strengthen that up. So just remember, impression of all the time, impression of. It doesn't have to be exact. Bit of dabbing, bit of dry brushing. It'll just work enough. That's working really nicely. There's also a darker line, like a hedgerow, just along the bottom of this bit. So I'm going to stick that in. I don't know if it's a hedgerow. And then just what I'm going to do is just grab a little bit of water and just touch into that, but not everywhere. So what I've done is picked up a bit of the colour, and what I've got is some lost and found edges, so I've missed a few bits on that bottom section, and then I'm just pulling that through to start to create that nice sort of frosty pattern. I'm picking up little bits of paint. So this is a sepia. So I've got water, and then the paint, and then more paint, I'm just bringing in to create this darker area. So it's all quite loose. Then we're going to do that thing again with the lost and found edges. So we're going to get some water and we're going to run, and I'm touching in places and not in other places. And that's how you create those dry patches and those lost and found edges. What I want you to do once you've done that is just with a damp brush pull across horizontally in places where you've hit that with the water. It's just going to start to give the feeling that this is a surface. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of paint. Just do a couple more. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that off really well and I've turned upside down now. I'm going to focus on getting this focal point tree in. And I find it easier to paint the brushes and paint the branches upside down. So I'm going to start with some sepia. I'm fairly loaded on the brush. I'm using a number 6 to start with, and then I'm going to move down. So I'm getting this main bulk of the foliage and the trunk in before I go any further. So that's number 6. I've got a number 10 with some water on. And I'm wetting further than it needs to go, so I've got a damp brush, it's not soaking, and I just want to hit in places. I don't want this to be really, really sharp everywhere, so this is just softening in. And then I can do the same here. So touching the paint, but wetting further than it needs to go. Just move around this side. So I'm not going everywhere, but I just want to give it that sense of softness. I just come in a bit because it looks quite little there. You'll see what I mean. So just touching and wetting further than it needs to go, and it's got somewhere to spread. If it's too loaded and goes too far, damp brush and just pull it back a little bit. Okay, I'm going to dry that bit off. I'm still going to work upside down. That's nice and dry now. So I've got my number 6 loaded and I'm working flat, and I'm going to start to get a little bit of this fine foliage appearing. Again, it's nice and random. I'm holding my brush really flat to the page, getting a nice area there. Then I've got my line writer, and I'm going to work from the trunk up and through whilst it's still damp, and do a few of these. And get a really nice feel happening. Take your time, this is the focal point of the picture. You don't want to go too big because you want that sense of scale. keep them nice and fine at the end, nice and random. Less is always more. These little wispy bits always work nicely. You can take them further than that dry brushing as well. Winter trees always have that bit that goes a little bit further. Okay, so you now, once that's dry, going to want to create that telegraph pole with a straight edge. What you need is either a piece of card that's the right length, that's fairly straight, or something like what I'm using, which is a loyalty card, and then I'm painting it on with a sepia, and you're going to come on and pop it on like that. So you're basically printing. Have a couple of practice goes. It's really hard to get a definite straight edge when you're actually painting. You can do it by hand, but I always think if you can give yourself a little bit of help, then why not? So I'm going to come on and pop that on there. There we go. So that's come on and it's all nice and straight there. Okay, so it needs to be right about the same sort of scale. You can just paint a little bit of a card if you've gone smaller. I'm going to dry that off well and turn back round now. With the sepia now, we've got a similar technique happening that we did the other side, which is we're going to come in with a line of sepia, we're going to get a brush loaded with water, and we're going to touch in places and not in others. And then we can, with our brush and a little bit of sepia, sweep that through. So you're getting that feeling that it's a bit frosty. So I've swept that through, and then you can just touch places in water, and then you can come back in with a loaded brush with sepia. Just going to just touch that way as well. If you've got a bit of sepia on the brush, you just get some darker patches in places. Okay, so we just need to do a little bit similar this side to what we did here. This is a bigger chunk and it's got a hint of green. So what I'm going to use is a tiny bit of sap green that's on my palette. You could use whatever green if you've got a few greens sat around. So I'm going to bring some of this in just on this side. And then come in with some sepia. I'll come back down to the side so I can. You don't want it to be too bright, so make sure you take some of the sepia into your green bit. Then you can bring the sepia down at the bottom as well. If you miss an odd bit as you're coming down, you're going to get those captures, those glimpses of light that you can see on the photograph as well, which will work quite nicely. Then I'm going to swap to my round number 10 and pop some water on the brush. I'm going to come down and it's that touching in places but not in others. So you're getting those lost and found edges and you're softening in at the same time. Then just make sure I've got plenty of water on. Not too much, dab a tiny bit off, and then I'm just going to pull, again horizontal. So I'm just pulling some of that colour just so I start to form that pathway. If it goes too far, then the way to do it is to dry your brush off and just push back in a little bit. You don't want it to flow so far it just looks like a muddy mess at this stage. So I can do it both ways. I can push it back and I can pull it out wherever I need it. These horizontal bits. Okay, I'm going to dry that bit off. Okay, so that's dried off nicely now. What I've got is some tea light. What I'm going to try to do is get some textured effect. It's always a bit hit and miss with candle wax because you can never see where you've gone and what you've got. So we'll do a mixture of textured effect with this and textured effect with brushing. What I'm hoping is I get some effect from this, but I might not. So I want you to just hit the paper where you can see some lighter bits. If you've had candle wax before and it's gone an absolute disaster and you think I really don't want to do this, you could try a little bit of salt. If you are nervous of it, you can always try it on a tester bit first. It's one of those things, you either get it right and it works really well, or you get it wrong and it doesn't work well, or you can not get anything to work. So I always like a bit of a challenge. So what I'm doing is just trying to pick out some light areas, not on the puddles, sort of around the puddles. I'm not using it on a hard edge, I'm using the flat, and I'm just hoping that the surface of the paper picks up a little bit here and there. It doesn't really matter if you go over the puddles because you're actually not going to be painting in the puddles anymore, you're going to be painting round the puddles. But I'm trying to keep it outside the puddles anyway. Just trying to get a few lines if I can. That might work. Oh, let's go for it. So there's a bit on there. We'll just see what happens. So make sure you've got plenty of sepia to hand. My water's a bit mucky at the minute, but I don't think that really matters now. We're going into this area and it's not the cleanest anyway. So I've got my round number 6, which is going to be the sepia brush, and a round number 10 with water on. And we're just going to work our way down the picture. Try to remember where your puddles are. What I'm going to do is just come round the puddle with the sepia because it's a darker effect. Just so I can pick some of that out. And that's going to help lift that. A few little brush marks. And a lot of hope. And this is this next puddle. It's a bit further down. So I'm going to go 2 puddles and then I'm going to take some water on so that I'm not spending too long and letting it dry. And you can see that I'm doing horizontal strokes. So I'm hoping that that's going to make it feel like the surface of a path. Okay, I'm going to come on with a little bit of water now. Touching in places. And hopefully you're going to get that feeling of texture You need to make sure that it's dark enough that your puddles are standing out. That's working quite nicely. I'm just going to carry on down. You can do this once, then you can come over to create some darker patches. So don't feel that you've got to do the whole lot in one go. You could do some dry brushing on it after, if you haven't got the texture appearing. I appear to have done quite well with the old candle wax this time. Maybe I should not speak too soon, because we might get down to the bottom of I've got an absolute disaster. So we're getting to the bigger puddles now, so you're going to work in different areas and then just take a bit of water in. Conscious all the time that you don't want this to dry before you've got a bit of water coming through. To break it up. Right, load my brush with a bit of water. Let's go for it. Let's break this up a bit. So I've got big areas of wax here. That's worked really well. That colour from the sky layer should still be showing through. Don't forget to just touch odd little bits in the puddles. You don't want them to be too sharp. Right, so here we've got all those lines where you've got tyre tracks. So I'm just going to try and do a few of them this way. And then hopefully when I come through with a wet brush, it's going to work nicely. So just dabbing through. Okay, back into the sepia. So we're getting to this big puddle now at the front. Need a tiny bit more sepia. So what you don't want is for that edge to be too smooth. So make sure you're coming in quite roughly. It works quite well to have quite a lot of thick paint on the brush and dab rather than try to paint quite fluid, because that's giving you that broken edge. Okay, I'm just gonna come out a bit so you can see the bottom section that I'm painting. So dab, dab, dab. Just get that base in. You can come and add a few extra bits later. Okay, and water. The beauty now, as well, as an odd watermark isn't going to ruin it. It will actually enhance it with this texture at the bottom anyway. A bit of water around here. Just keep loading your brush up with water and coming through this thick paint. If you haven't got as much candle wax on, then just mist lots of bits with the water and it will still work. Then where you've got these bits in the puddle, I just want you to slightly hit, just so it grounds them a little bit. Just that bottom edge tends to work. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that pretty well and I'm on to my last section now. So what I've just started to do is, with a bit of the aubergine colour from the sky, you can see in this section I've just started to pull on a little bit more detail. So that I've got these track marks here. What you've got to make sure is you don't go too strong with all of this. You don't want it to look glaringly obvious that you're striping through things, but it's just giving you a chance to add a little bit more shadow in places. And the aubergine colour works better because it's not as strong. So this is just to give you little tweaks. That contrast will make all the difference. If you come on and it looks too strong, take a bit of water in. Less is more with anything like this. I'm just looking for those darker areas and anything that I might need to add a tiny bit more detail to. Just gives it an extra bit of a glow. Come down here, get that line a bit sharper. A bit of a line coming this way as well. A few little bits round here. Extra warmth then at that bottom end. Then I just want you to work on any real dark bits of sepia. I want you to focus this mainly in this front section, so there's a hell of a lot of texture happening. You don't have to get it all, but those few little bits will help this section come forward and help the rest go back and give you much better sense of distance. So you can get it nice and thick on the brush, and it's random dabs really. those bits that are coming into the puddle that are sticking up. It's giving that really nice texture. They're the bits we want to capture as best we can. Any little bits this side. Don't have to go mad. Just enough to bring that forward a little bit at the front. Okay, so I'm quite pleased with that. Hope you've enjoyed this week. See you next week.